Hi, I'm Theresa Thomas, and I've been a master gardener for 7 years, but I've been weeding for 47 years. Next slide. Today we're going to discuss the definitions and characteristics of weeds, the history of weeds, why weeds are beneficial or a problem, common weeds, integrated pest management, weed management strategies, and prevention. And remember that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that's really where it all starts. Next slide. So a weed is any plant growing where it is not wanted. Weeds are plants whose undesirable qualities outweigh the good. They're out of place and not intentionally sown, and they have virtues that have not yet been discovered. I mean, eventually one of them may become a cure for some weird disease. You never know. Next slide. Characteristics of weeds. They grow only in proximity to human habitation and cultivation. They have no particular requirements for germination. They have special adaptations for dispersal of seeds, and some of them have several adaptations. They have extensive root systems. They thrive in bare, disturbed, compacted soil. They are tough, fast-growing, and persistent. So next slide. So the history of weeds. They've been around as long as we have. Weeds followed the cultivation of grain crops from the Near East to Europe and were well established by 2000 BCE. The New Stone Age people would clear a place to settle down and shelter, and they used, and this is the scientific term, dump heaps, where they put their refuse and left it in piles, and it of course decomposed and became compost. And so the seeds grew up from that and cross-pollinated and hybridized, and that was where weeds began. So we are the start of all weeds, and we took them with us everywhere. They study weeds because, they use pollen to study weeds because pollen has a really hard exterior coating like plastic that it allows it to endure for the ages. So archaeologists, as they go down through the layers of earth or lake beds, peat bogs, they can see when weeds were introduced. Here in California, they even studied the adobe that was used to build the buildings. And they found that in 1769, California had 16 non-native species. And by 1858, we had 63. Of course, some of these came with the Spanish, et cetera, and the woodsmans and all that. But by 1848, of course, then we had the gold rush and real settling. So between 1848 and 1860, our weed numbers went up to 134. But now we have 846. So we're really doing a good job on propagating weeds. We encourage these plants by giving them the disturbed habitat that they need, because that's what we do best. So next slide. So the benefits of weeds, they bring nutrients and water up to the surface and down from the air. We all know about nitrogen fixing. They break up compaction and control erosion. They increase the organic matter as they continually grow and die, making humus. They provide habitat for microbes and animals. They attract beneficial insects, and they have nutritional or medicinal purposes and are cultivated here and in other countries for those things. Next slide. Why they're a problem, and for most of the same reasons that they're a benefit, they're also a problem. They compete for nutrients, they block sunlight and steal water, they camouflage pests and diseases, they provide habitat for pests to overwinter, they decrease crop yield, they share crop diseases, and they only get worse. You never hear of weed failures, you hear of crop failures. They can be fire and tripping hazards, and they can cause bodily harm to humans and animals. When you think about the toxic weeds that are out there, such as datura, foxglove, poison hemlock, poison ivy, which I've been running into this week, pokeweed. They can definitely be a problem. So the next slide. And of course, we've planted some of these problems. Some of our horticultural plants have become invasive. And by invasive, we mean that they're kind of greedy. They crowd out what should naturally be here. They take over areas that should have been native and are no longer. So some of those that we've planted are Vinca major. My old neighbor told me that here in Nevada City, they always planted Vinca major over grave sites. And so that's why you'll see it all over this county. St. John's wort, ivy, euphorbias, yerba buena, and lamian. St. John's wort, I talked about how, I mentioned how plants can develop different ways of spreading. St. John's wort can produce seeds. It also has underground rhizomes, and then it has, their branches can touch the ground and root from that. So they have lots of ways of spreading. And they estimate that one St. John's wort plant can produce 100,000 seeds in a year. And those seeds are viable for 10 to 30 years. So that can be difficult to get rid of. And it also can be a fire hazard because any plant that has high oil content, low moisture content, thin leaves or fine needles, that's non-deciduous, and that can accumulate dead wood underneath it can be a fire hazard. So next slide. So perennials that can be invasive: anemones, yarrows, hollyhocks, daisies, Chinese lanterns, Centranthus or Jupiter's beard, which is also known as valerian. And during this COVID, I've been doing a lot of walking around town, and in Nevada City, valerian is a really pretty plant. You'll see it poking up out of all the old stone walls, etc. It's spread all over town. Acanthus bears breeches. I actually looked that one up today. I didn't even know what it was. It's beautiful. So oxalis, good ground cover. There's several different oxalises. They do crowd out other plants, including natives. Talk about tough and persistent. I had this house remodeled a couple of years ago, and we have a small backyard, and the construction fellows use that as their staging area and totally wiped out the lawn. Lawn has not attempted to come back, but the oxalis has thrived quite well. So the next slide. So we've also planted invasive shrubs and vines. We've done a real job on this country. Himalayan blackberries we imported for the taste of the berries. The Scotch broom, of course, everybody knows Scotch broom. When I first moved here in '74, I came in May, drove down Highway 20 and saw all the broom in bloom and thought, oh, how beautiful. Not knowing I was going to be pulling it for the next 45 years or whatever. Anyway, so we have three kinds of broom. We have Scotch, French, and Spanish. And they do crowd out other plants, and they can be a fire hazard. And they say during a fire, the seed pods will explode and shoot the seeds 20 to 35 feet into the air. And also in hot weather, I have heard, I have not seen it, that they can also explode during hot weather. And each broom, they say in a single meter of soil, you can find 6,700 seeds of Scotch broom. So not only are you pulling up the broom by its roots, you also have to contend with all those seeds coming back, and they're viable for 8 years. The honeysuckle, trumpet vine, we all know they can bury your house in no time. And I'm surprised that we don't have wisteria on this, because years ago, I admired a friend's wisteria vine, and she said, well, if you plant one, you have to keep control of it. Keep it from tearing down your house. And I said, sure, I can do that. So I planted a wisteria, which is gorgeous. What she didn't warn me about was that the seeds will move all over the property and come up in totally different places. Next slide. We've also planted invasive trees. The tree of heaven came to the United States in, oh boy, the 1700s. It came as a horticultural plant for back east. But then when the Chinese came to the West Coast to work on the railroads and the gold mines, this is a tree whose origin is China, and it reminded them of home. And so they brought it and planted it all over this county. If you walk through Nevada City, you will see some giant trees of heaven. And again, they are very difficult to get rid of. They are allelopathic, which means that they exude chemicals that discourage other things from growing around them. There are other plants that do that. For example, black walnut and redwoods. Mimosa and acacias are really gorgeous trees that were planted because of their beauty, and nurseries, advertise them as fast growing. So they became very popular and they spread like crazy. So next slide. You're doing great. So next one is the herbs that are local herbs. It's hard to believe that an herb could become an invasive weed, but if you've ever had a little mint patch, then you know it can become an invasive weed. They are mint and lemon balm and thyme and oregano are a little bit easier to control. They are smaller, they're easier to pull out. But if you do plant them, contain them in a boundary or put them in pots so that they can't go anywhere. And a lot of us are using elfin or woolly thyme for ground covers or lawn replacement because they're very low in water. They're very easy to maintain. During this COVID, I have adopted a piece of land here that belongs to the city, which is of course not being kept up. And I've been weeding it and looking up each of the weeds as I come across them that I don't know what they are. And it's been very satisfying because I get some exercise, I get outside, I see neighbors, I'm learning weeds, learning some of their history and why we have them. And I'm making a piece of land really beautiful. So I'm hoping that in this COVID, you're finding something really great to do with weeds. So, and now I'm going to pass this on to Anne, who's been changing the slides for me.